The nights here were often rowdy. He had to admit to being involved upon occasion. Stepping outside, the stark contrast to the interior struck him, and he shuddered against the cold. Descending the steps to the car park on unsteady feet, he walked towards where he'd parked the car. Calling a cab to get home would be sensible, but he dismissed the thought. It wasn't far. Light rain was falling, and he looked up at the nearby streetlight to better judge the intensity. It was much the same as when he'd arrived 2 hours earlier. Had he known the plan, if indeed it was the plan to have a session at the pub, he would have declined the offer. However, it was sold to him as a catch-up meeting. To be fair, that wasn't unusual and often took place in a pub. More often than not, it was also this establishment. It had been a while since he had been into the office, and his absence was leading to friction. He could feel it, even if nothing was being said. He couldn't afford to allow that to continue, and feared it was already too late, but, in any event, he'd made the effort. Jody looked back over his shoulder towards the pub as he approached his car. He could make out the team, his business partner along with their small entourage of administrators, still inside, their movements showing the party was in full swing. Turning back, he eyed his BMW and crossed towards it, fishing out the fob. He smiled to himself, but it was tinged with elements of relief and regret. The relief came from the knowledge he'd managed the evening without having to be too vocal. Expecting a grilling for not pulling his weight in recent weeks, he found the absence of business talk to be refreshing. The regret was born out of keeping secrets, necessary secrets. After all, that was the nature of the beast, but somehow on this occasion at least, it felt disloyal. Who was he to talk about loyalty? Loyalty, a virtue which was, by all accounts, diminishing in importance within the circle he moved in. Once it had been one of the primary requirements, but apparently not any more. The sense someone had his back was a distant memory, and paranoia was now his closest friend. Perhaps it had always been this way, and what he hankered for was a vision of a nostalgic past that never truly existed. His father always told him people lived in the memories of days gone by and, as a result, missed what was unfolding before their very eyes. Having never understood what that statement meant, it was easy to dismiss, but now, many years too late, his father's words made perfect sense to him. Shrugging off the melancholy that threatened to take root, he opened the door. Not wishing to get rainwater running onto the driver's seat, he took off his coat and threw it into the rear. A sound nearby made him look in the direction he thought it came from. There were 2 recycling points at the edge of the pub's boundary, large metal deposit bins for clothes, by the look of them. Taking 2 steps forward, he waited for his eyes to adjust to the surroundings. Illuminated only by the streetlights, the surrounding trees and bushes were shrouded in darkness, and their gentle sway in the breeze was barely visible. Jody stood still, the hairs on his neck raised as he stared into the gloom. What had he heard? The rain was forgotten, and he ignored the fact his hair was now soaked through. Water began to run down his face, and yet, still, he peered into the shadows. "Is anyone there?" he called, narrowing his gaze. No reply. A car passed by on the road, the familiar sound of displaced water breaking his train of thought. Realizing he had been holding his breath, Jody retreated towards the car. Noting the rain driving in through the open door and onto the leather interior, he cursed himself. Irritated at allowing his imagination to run riot, he reached the car and took hold of the frame of the door. With one last look back towards the trees, he shook his head, smiling and feeling foolish. "Get a grip, man," he said under his breath. Jody didn't hear the movement behind him, nor did he see the reflection of the amber streetlights glinting off the hammerhead as it came down on the back of his skull. He fell, unconscious before striking the ground. Several more blows followed, with the only accompaniment being the sound of his assailant's exertions whilst wielding the weapon. There was no resistance. Soon, all that could be heard was the sound of the intensifying rain coming down in sheets and striking the tarmac all around him.